Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to talk about step 3 of the collage drawing. We're going to go over adding tone, texture, details, line quality, all that stuff that we talked about with the hand drawing, just going in a bit further with it for this assignment. So let me just go in and show you where we're at with this drawing and talk about a few techniques. Let's switch over to the document camera. All right, so here's where I am. For this assignment, make sure that you have a really solid collage to work from. And I do want to see a finished image of this before you really go into this step, the next step here. What I'm looking for in the collage is, a combination of things to make it unique, right? Or appropriating images, but make sure that you don't appropriate an entire composition. You want to make sure that you are grabbing pieces and parts and you have control over what sort of compositional elements you're adding into this. So what I have here is my gridded collage. I've transferred that to this piece of paper using the grid system. We talked about it in the previous video. What I've gone in and done is strengthen the lines a little bit. Actually went in with mechanical pencil. And you could also do the same thing if you just use your HB pencil and sharpen it up pretty nice. But I just went in and confirmed some lines because I'm going to be adding a lot of background into this, and I don't want my lines to go away. So what I want to do now is talk about some techniques about different things that we can approach. When I look at this, what I'm going to do is likely fill in a lot of the background first. So the sky, the water to begin with. And then clean that up because I'm going to run over into these parts as I fill that in, and then go back and add texture and tone for the rock, and then a lot of line quality for the caribou. And then similarly, there's a lot of reflected light that's coming into the water, so I'm going to add tone into this and then subtract it out using the eraser. I'm going to show a few more techniques as well. So let's just talk about some different ways of working. I think that's going to be important in this project, the way that we begin. Let me just zoom in a little bit more here. Okay, so what I want to talk first about is what's really important is how you use your pencils. Now, we talked about how the different grades of pencils can give you different tonal ranges based on how you use them, from 2H, which is light, to HB, which is middle gray, to 2B, which is darker, and then finally the real black layout pencil. So there's a variety of different ways that you can use these. First of all, I just want to talk about how you use the pencil. So with the HB pencil, obviously with a point, you can make wonderful lines, right? And if you press down hard to begin with and you lift up lightly, you can get a line that starts out thick and then becomes thin. And that can be really helpful when you're drawing different components. Lines can be broken as well. As we start, we can kind of lift the pencil, we can dash, we can dot, we can do all kinds of different techniques with a tip of the pencil to make different varieties of tones. Combinations of lines are important. So when you're drawing something that has a lot of line quality, whether it's hair, fur, any sort of woven material, anything like that, you want to think about the combination of lines and how they overlap. Obviously, more lines closer together will give you darker areas. Less lines farther apart will give you lighter areas. And as I start to do this, you can see that I'm getting a density of tone and essentially what's something that looks like a gradation as I go across the page of this line. So if I look closely at this, there we go. You can see I'm getting denser marks down here, darker, lighter marks as they go apart. So the line quality can be really important about when you're working with these different components. And also the direction of the line is important too. If I have a circle, it can be flat, but if I start to add curvilinear lines to it, I can begin to make it look round, right? So by changing the direction, by thinking about how the line can wrap around this object, suddenly I can get something that starts to look a lot more curvilinear, a lot more three-dimensional by the direction of the marks that I'm making. So not just applying random lines, but rather thinking about line as form becomes really important in rendering an object. Now, similarly, as I think about this, I could start to consider lines that cross. So cross contour lines are ones that go in one direction and then also go perpendicular. So if I rotate this, because it's a little bit easier for me to draw an arc like this, I can start to think about lines that wrap the opposite direction. And this can be a great way to give dimension, tone, detail, texture, line quality to a drawing or an object by simply cross contouring your lines, right? So in this case now what I'm getting is, a good density of lines at the bottom because I'm crossing over a lot of different ways, and I'm getting a gradation going up from light to dark. So, and this also looks like it's kind of fuzzy, furry, hairy, right? It has that linear kind of gritty texture to it. This type of mark making could also be done with a sort of a scribble mark too. So if you're thinking about overlapping lines in this combination where you're changing direction often, that can be a different way to consider. If I was to draw a ball of yarn or something that's like a furry or hairy or has that sort of qualities to it, you might want to think about going in and adding a lot of curvilinear lines, which are lines that have arcs and circles to them. And this sort of scribble-like quality can be really important to build up density and tone into an object as well, right? And remember that it's important when you're considering this that don't be limited by the additive marks. You can certainly use subtractive marks as well. So if I really fill this in, there I've got a much different type of texture. But I can take the kneaded eraser and I can lightly knock this back, those lines that I was making, to give it some sort of tonal range as well. All right, so I've got light to dark moving in those different directions, and line quality becomes important. Next, I want to talk about this idea. So I've used pretty much the point of the pencil for that, but when we sharpen a pencil, especially in a really long sort of format, here's my sharpening cup, old yogurt cup. Sharpen this up, I get a nice long point. Then you can use the side of the pencil. Now the side of the pencil does something different. It hits the grain of the paper and applies that to the page as well. So you get a different type of mark that's made, right? You're seeing something that has basically dots and lines, right? So when you use the pencil like this, I change my grip. Hold it like this now, right? That way I can push down with my finger and I can press it into the page. So if I start hard, I get a dark mark. If I loosen it up, I can get a thin mark. And that can be a great way of adding different types of tonation and mark making to your page as well. So, a rocky side of a mountain may have a lot of cracks and crevices that you can emphasize by the side of your pencil. And as I bring this in, I'm changing the pressure. I'm also rolling the tip of the pencil because, that can really help as well. I can shade in different combinations and I can get a lot of different types of mark making. If you go in this direction, you can get a really kind of fine straight line. If you go in this direction, you get a fuzzier, hazier kind of a line. So those combinations become really important as you're starting to practice with the pencils. So before you really dive into an area, really practice a little bit with what the pencil can do. I'm using the point a little bit, rolling it down to the edge, going back to the point, rolling it down to the edge. Combination of those marks can give you a much different quality of line. And of course, if you change pencils, you'll get a different quality as well. So if I sharpen up, the layout pencil to a point, then I get a different quality as well. So this can apply a much darker kind of quality. And it's also softer, so it's going to be more speckly or more dotted or have that sort of texture. So the grain of the paper can offer you a really nice textural quality as well. As I draw this rocky cliff here, I can add the grit of the tone. I can follow in some of these craggy details. I can press down pretty hard and get some really, really dark areas. I can use the point to make some cracks. I can get a lot of different qualities coming through by using the different qualities of pencils. So that's important. And again, don't forget that the eraser is a powerful tool. So you can make marks, you can knock them back, and draw on those different combinations. Another thing about texture that's important to consider is different techniques. So here's a rock. Okay, this works a little bit better on thinner paper. The Bristol paper you'll have to press down pretty hard, but it still will work. But if I put this underneath a sheet of paper, and particularly if I take the darker pencils, the 2B or even the layout pencil, I rub this on the surface, I'm going to pick up the texture of the rock, which is great. So if I do this now, and I change directions a little bit as I'm going, then I'll get a really wonderful organic texture here. There we go. So here is the surface of the rock transferred to the paper in a way that would be really hard to draw. And if I were to accentuate that with more drawing, you know, if I darken in certain areas, if I consider where the light is coming, where the darkness is coming, I may want to go in and kind of add a contour or detail here. Suddenly now I've got this mountaintop started that could be really effective as I start to add in light and shadow and highlight different areas, right? So the rubbing is a great way to bring out some textures. It's something that I recommend experimenting with. It doesn't always work the first time. And again, you know, the thicker paper, you're gonna have to press down a little bit harder. I'm just using copy paper for this demonstration, but it does work with the Bristol. You just need to be a bit more aggressive with it, all right? But there you go, with a quick rubbing texture, I've got this nice organic surface and, you know, much harder to draw all those craggy details simply using them from what they make, and also maybe going in and pulling out a few highlights here, you know, where the light might be hitting it. Did a really wonderful three-dimensional quality to it. Now I've gone to Home Depot actually, and I went through the flooring section and I found all these samples. So this is like a wood grain, you know, different stone textures. And I have a sample of these, and I just, you know, they're free. Well, supposedly, if you're going to be buying them, right? But again, you know, they provide different types of textures. So there's the kind of rocky ground with lots of nice holes in it. Here's the wood grain. It's going to be a little bit different. But, you know, you don't have to go to Home Depot to do this. You can totally just find surfaces around the house. You know, you got a piece of wood, if you've got some flooring, if you got a rock, if you got a, even the wall will provide some interesting textures. So there you go, more linear texture for this wood thing. So again, it's a great way to just get some surface texture going on the page. All right, let's talk about the more subtle details. So tonation, gradation, all of those things. We talked a little bit about blending. What I did want to mention was that, you know, a technique, and I showed this a little bit in the hand drawing, but technique I often use is just simply take a piece of paper towel and roll it up into a ball. Okay, set that aside. And then this sandpaper pad that comes in your kit is super helpful. Now you can use a nail file, you can use an old piece of sandpaper, you can even use the scrap dusts from when you sharpen your pencil. But what I'm going to do here is take the HB pencil, wherever it may have gone, oh, it's over here, and I'm just going to make some graphite powder. Now you just be a little careful with this because it is, you know, a metal, and you know, don't breathe it in. If you sneeze, it will go everywhere. But I'm just getting some of that dust on the surface of the page, okay, like that. And then, you know, you may want to do this on a scrap piece of paper to start, but what you can do is get this into a ball and make a nice flat surface with it, right? And then just start to simply rub very lightly in a circular direction. And you can get wonderful, smooth gradations of tone, right? And the more that you apply, the softer that you can blend it and get that smooth kind of quality to it. I apologize, the lighting isn't the greatest in here, but this is starting to have a really nice sort of tone to it. When you're doing this, you can think a little bit about how you might approach it. So, you know, if I tear a piece of paper, I could actually use this as a mask as well. And what I mean by that is, if I take this, if I wanted to have a straight kind of horizon on the bottom, let's say, maybe the horizon, maybe the sky meets the water or something like that, I can start to take this and rub right next to that edge, kind of off the edge a little bit, and I would probably add a little bit more powder here to get this to come out. I'm probably gonna have to make it darker so you can see, but here now we have this really sharp edge, right? So if I hold this up, there you go, you can see that the paper blocked it out, and we get this wonderful transition from white paper to the tonation, right? Similarly, you know, maybe that hits a mountainside or something like that. Here's a landscape cliff kind of coming in, right? I can take this ripped edge and give that quality as well. So there you go. Now I've got this like you know, kind of landscape edge that I could emphasize maybe with some line and make this look as though it's some sort of mountain vista. Maybe there's a plateau here and I've got some, you know, striations of the sedimentary rock coming in here. So the masking quality is really good to get these different techniques to come through and work to your advantage. So there we go, we've got a little bit of that ripped piece of paper that became kind of a plateau of an edge. But also, one thing that's great about the tonation is that we can erase into it, right? So if we had some clouds come in here, you know, we might start to erase those into it, right? So sometimes you have to work a little bit back and forth, right? You can't just have one technique work for everything. But as I start to bring in some light and shadow, and don't forget that clouds have light and shadow that cast on them as well, I may come back and add a little bit of tonation into this as well, particularly on the bottom maybe. This is very subtle, so I don't know if it's going to pick up very well. But you get the idea, kind of adding, subtracting, working back and forth, erasing into an object and kind of getting more depth and dimension is going to be really helpful to make this feel and look like it has a lot of depth to it. So the graphite powder is not necessarily always a direct solution. It works really well in some cases. I tend to think about it for background, not necessarily so much for foreground, but it does give you a quick overlay of tone that you can manipulate and use. All right, hopefully you can see this a little bit better. All right, so I've got some soft kind of puffy clouds coming in. Erased it out with a kneaded eraser, added in more tone with the blending tool. And you know, this could start to shape up into a much more detailed sort of quality. You can also use masking for erasing, right? If there was a, you know, a line that needed to be drawn for an edge, you could certainly erase out, and now we have this really hard edge for that eraser mark that's sort of coming through. And some other eraser tools are helpful too, you know, like I like the mechanical pencils with the white erasers because I can, you know, work into those and kind of draw and erase as I go as well in those different combinations. So that can be really helpful as well as you're starting to add into this. So texture, tonation, line quality, rubbings, blending, all of these things are going to need to work together to give you a finished composition, thinking about looking very closely at all the elements of your composition. So remember, your drawing is evidence that you've looked really closely, okay? And I want to see the details. I want to know that this is made of rock. I want to know that this is made of fur. The sky has transitional tones, that this is water, etc. as you go through this whole composition. So I'm going to pause for now. I'm going to dive into my drawing and show you what I'm working on.